Good morning, Dad. It's March 2nd,
A
2017.
March 2nd.
Yep, already. I thought before we look at more photos, I wanted to ask you to tell a story that I've heard and thought was very interesting. And that's the story about Brandon and the live, is it a telephone wire?
This electric wire. Is it going?
Yeah, please tell us the story.
We lived during the war years, Second World War years, in a small semi-detached house, red brick, and in view of the fact that it was wartime, there was added, not physically added, but on the same site, added an air raid shelter, expecting correctly that the Germans would bomb. In fact, I remember as a boy, after the end of the war, clambering over the ruins of a house just about 100 yards away, which had been a direct hit.
Wow.
Um,
A residence.
yeah, I'm not aware that anyone was killed. There's also a little close, about 100 yards away, also a factory which was bombed. So that's a context. So we lived in this house. At that point, let's see, I was born in 39. I was, as I like to say, one of the causes of the Second World War. And Uncle John was born. John was born in 1943. Yeah. Anyway, one one residue of the war was structures which had been erected for defensive purposes, including, incidentally, also allotments. Each city, each town, each village set aside a common land to be used for growing food, anticipating food shortage, which was wise. Anyway, at the end of the war, we would play around in the air raid shelter, as children will, playing hide and seek and so on. But also Uncle Roger and Uncle Brandon, especially Uncle Roger because he was the oldest and was quite interested in scientific things, including electricity. He, I think with Brandon's help, was doing something or another in the air raid shelter. Air raid shelter which during the war had been used. I remember spending Christmas Day in our air raid shelter at one point. I forget the year.
You mean at Christmas Day, meaning it was used as an extra extra room? Or just as a play area?
Air raid warning. And so wherever
Christmas
you were,
Day?
you went into the air raid shelter.
So that was a Christmas Day you had an air raid.
Yeah, yeah. Well, on one occasion, Brandon and Roger were doing something or another, and it involved transmitting electricity from the house to a bulb in the air raid shelter.
Oh, okay.
So they're obviously planning to do something there. I don't know what. Maybe have a residence of some description.
Their own room?
Yeah.
That was after the war they were doing this.
That would have been after the war. But I was sitting, the back of our house, number 13 Ashmore Avenue, was a large window which looked out onto what would have been in the past a garden, but since the war, it was a blank wall. And on that side of the house, you could also look into the air raid shelter because it was facing the house. Well, I was sitting in the dining room doing something, perhaps reading, I don't know. I wasn't a very good reader, so maybe not reading. Perhaps I was drawing. Anyway, I heard a cry, and I looked out and I saw Brandon was holding onto a wire connecting the house and the air raid shelter, and I supposed that he was joking, and I sort of laughed. But in fact, but fortunately, my father, who was always feared the worst, I guess I take after
I was
him.
going to say, Dad.
My father immediately thought the worst, that Brandon was being electrocuted, and so he dashed into the, I forget where he was in the house, but he dashed through the kitchen and into the back there. There's a little narrow alleyway between the air raid shelter and the house, and en route he turned off the electricity, and Brandon sank to the floor, to the ground, and he would have been electrocuted,
Right.
If it hadn't been for my father's very hasty action.
Right. Because isn't the voltage twice it?
Yes,
that
twice.
it is in the
It's
States,
220.
which is very strong.
My poor Roger got a terrible telling off from my father.
Can't imagine.
Because he had left it untended and with the electricity on,
Right.
which is the worst thing you could possibly do.
Yeah.
Mercifully, by the grace of God, surely, all Brandon sustained from this incident was a great scar across his hand, across the palm of his hand where he gripped it.
Right.
So that's the story.
Right.
But
A near-death experience that you
a
didn't
near-death
realize was
experience,
happening
yeah.
before your very eyes.
Of course, Auntie Gillian and myself also had a near-death experience with electricity years
Really?
later.
I don't know if I know this.
In Wales, in Anglesey. We had been for, we'd gone walking to Bencloch, where there was a shop and they sold Wall's ice cream, and also, very importantly, the paper which would contain the cricket results. Anyway, and then we'd walk by the cliff path, we called it, cliff path, with a view out to the sea. And then we'd come into the bay, Dinas Bay, which is where, and on that bay, facing out to the water, was Auntie Sybil's bungalow, where we were headed for. And it began to rain. And we were probably close, like a couple of 100 yards, I think, at this when it began to rain, and we were running to get to the shelter, when suddenly there was, our experience was this, that it was as if a tremendous force had gripped us and thrown us on the ground. It wasn't as if there's something you could touch, tangible. But it was just power. Right. And we'd been, we couldn't have been actually hit by the lightning, but very, very close, because it was a slope down to the sea, and her bungalow was at the other end on the hill. So we picked ourselves up and bewildered in a way, but anxious to get to where we didn't know what it had hit us. And of course, they had been watching for us because they knew we were out,
Right.
anticipating us back. And they were all standing at the window and saw this happening. So that was
So did they see the lightning? Did they report having seen the lightning?
well, I'm one of them.
No, I mean the people at the window. Did they
I
see?
don't know. I don't know.
But they saw you throw it to the ground.
They would have heard a huge crack.
Right.
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 I've had other near death experiences. Another one was in Ashmore Avenue. I was in the front room, we called it, which was a living room. In the front room, and I don't know why this is happening. It may have been something to do with Christmas, perhaps, but a chair was there, or wasn't a chair there. There's something going on with regard to the electricity in the room.
Oh.
And I was curious about electricity, and so I think I climbed onto a chair, and the electricity was on, and I put my finger into the I got a mighty shock which threw me on the ground. And of course that was a 220 volt.
Which is very strong.
Yeah.
But was it like a light fixture that you put your finger in, or?
Yeah, well, you know, you screw in a bulb.
Right, that.
So you unscrew the bulb and then stick your finger in.
Oh, how old would you have been, Dad?
Oh, under the age of 10, I think.
Because you moved when you were 10, right?
So around about that. Yeah.
As I say, curiosity killed the cat, in this case the boy, but it didn't, so that's good. Right. Electricity. Very powerful. When you mentioned cricket earlier, I wanted to follow up on that, and because one of the things I think you've told me in the past is that when you first came to the States, you were very, I don't know if I'd describe it as homesick or just you had a hard time adjusting to being in Philadelphia, right? Is that right? When you came to live in Philadelphia, and one of the things that you were able to latch on to that made you feel more baseball because of the connection with cricket.
Yeah.
So you then started watching baseball regularly?
I didn't watch it. We didn't have a television. My introduction to cricket, apart from playing cricket, was listening on the radio to test matches. I clearly remember, I think, is it possible? I think 1946 was the Aussies came for it was a resumption of normal things
After the war.
And the Australians were very, very good cricketers. They had some very famous batsmen and bowlers. Lindwall, the Australian fast bowler, and they had Donald Bradman, Sir Donald.
On the Aussie side?
Pardon?
On the Aussie side, not on the English side, or are you talking about?
He was on the Aussie side. And we had a book ledger which was printed for keeping the score in cricket.
Right.
This is quite a performance, since cricket matches would last for one day. If they international, it'd be 7 days. Anyway, I can remember sitting in the same room where I nearly electrocuted myself, busily keeping the score.
Right.
On behalf of my brothers.
So Brandon and Roger were very keen.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And your father?
Yes, he was very keen on cricket. He used to go Saturday and or Sunday afternoons to Didsbury Cricket Club, which is in the outskirts of Manchester, and watch. It'd be a one-day affair or half a day, with a limited number of overs, balls being thrown at you. Anyway.
So he, or your family, we grew up with understanding that you were very keen on British football, what American soccer. Would you say your interest in cricket was about the same as that, or?
It was different. It was a much more of a cultural experience, cricket, because it occupies so many hours, which meant it therefore occupied meal times, food.
And did you ever go to any matches yourself,
Yeah.
cricket matches?
Yeah, not many, because it was relative to my resources or our resources. It was expensive, and you got to get there. Old Trafford, which is the name of the cricket ground, and later became the name of Manchester United
Right.
Football Club.
Was it the same location?
Same, not the same location exactly, but the same
Name.
area.
Same area. So I've heard of Old Trafford in association to
Yeah,
Man
yeah.
United. And now we grew up thinking Manchester United was the team because our cousins who were Uncle John and Aunt Susan's kids inculcated us with that. But then years later we found out that actually you grew up as a Manchester City fan. But that Manchester City had been doing poorly for a long time. So they weren't really contenders. Now recently they have become contenders as of 2017, last couple of years. But so you said that you were all Manchester City fans except for Uncle John. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And how did that happen? Do you know?
I think well, I think his support of Manchester United was related to our father's disdain for Manchester United.
Oh, okay.
And John, my father, had their rumbles, and so my father would like to dig it in if United lost.
Okay.
I don't think there's the same problem with cricket. There's only one. Cricket occupied a very different sort of role.
Right. Now switching to another subject, as a British citizen, would you care to tell us something for posterity about your feeling about the Queen and the royal family and how you felt about them growing up?
I remember the excitement when we were told, just through the newspaper, we were told that an obscure member of the royal family, I think an aunt of somebody or another, would be driving down Stockport Road underneath the railway bridge there at such and such a time. And so we all went out there and in order to wave and so on. It was absurd, really. Who knew who this person was?
But they was a member of the royal family.
Later on, we didn't have. We hadn't yet arrived in English culture to mock royalty. Indeed, the current Queen has very much diffused that. She's become a sort of legend in her own time,
Right.
And deservedly so. But we never went to, as a family, we never went to London. But as members of a Boys and Girls Christian organisation called the Covenanters, which had a national get together once a year in the summer, when there would be regions occupied by the Covenanters would compete against each other, and as far as we're concerned, the Bible reading competition was significant. I still have certificates
Do you?
upstairs. Yeah.
Because you said you won, right?
Well,
Or
I never won the final thing. Only Brandon did that.
oh, Brandon.
But I always won, as he had to in order to advance. I always won the local one, our own particular group, and then the regional one, and then all the regional champions compete in London. Well, I'm going into that because this gave occasion to actually see real royalty, and to see the sights of London, to climb up into St. Paul's, into the little tiny dome on top of St. Paul's dome. Well, the Queen became Queen in 52, I think it was, when her father died, and so I think the following June or July would be when I would go up to London, because I'd won again, and compete. Well, trying to say, what I remember.
Meeting the Queen or seeing the Queen, or
no, didn't see the Queen. We actually saw. I think it was the Duke of Edinburgh emerge in his chauffeur-driven car, limousine, you might say, into the area in front of Buckingham Palace, and you'd always go to London. When you went to Buckingham Palace, you'd always try to mildly taunt or joke at the guards,
right?
And how they managed to synchronize perfectly without looking at each other, walking back and forth like that.
The exchange, right?
Yeah.
Do you remember? I mean, I feel like one of the things that they talk a lot about is listening to the radio and listening to when the Queen or the King before would speak. Did your family do that? Listen to the Queen's speeches?
The Queen's speech, yes, we did. It was on Christmas Day.
So you'd gather around and turn on the radio.
Yeah, listen. I was remembering what it was that I was forgetting. Namely that the year 53 was very special because people coming from all over the world, and all the decorations were being put up, festoons